He told me that day in the parking lot that he didn't want to go through with it. He appeased me to the point of even driving me there. But he figured he'd try again. Before I actually got out the car, I was literally opening up the door to get out the car, and he stopped me and he said, "Babe, I don't want to abort her child. I want to keep it." And I told him that I was scared. But in all reality, I didn't want to prove my mom's words to be true. So even in the midst of me trying to talk him out of it, he told me, "Babe, I don't want to do this." And he told me something that I've never heard any man speak to me, but I'll never forget for as long as I live. And that was the last time that I actually drove back on an abortion clinic. He told me, "Everything's going to be all right. I'm going to go ahead. I'm going to take care of you and our child. Everything's going to be all right." From that day on, that did it for me. We got out of there, and for the first time in my life, I was happy. I was happy that he was going to take care of me, that this was a man that cared about me and didn't want me to get an abortion, and he he was ready for us to be a family, and I was so excited. Shortly after that, we ended up moving back to Cleveland, Ohio. I was raised in Cleveland, but my husband, I met him in LA. He's from LA, and I talked him into moving to Cleveland. And in our 3-year spout of being there, our marriage, oh my gosh, went on a downward spiral. And I came, even though I was pregnant, even though we were having our first son together, I was angry, and I still smoked. I drank. I wasn't drinking as much, but I still was a drinker. I still was a smoker. Very angry, sweared a lot, very intimidating even. We've gotten into huge arguments, within the 3 years that we were living in Ohio. And even with me being pregnant, I wanted to fist fight this man to prove to him how tough I was. And by the grace of God, he didn't give in. And my husband is a very strong man, but he did not give in to the fact that I was really threatening him. And it would surprise me a lot of the times, he ended up leaving me several times in our marriage. And each time he came back, I was so grateful, but I still didn't know how to treat him as the wife he deserved. And I really wanted to. At certain times, I wanted to. At other certain times, I'd only cared about myself. I wasn't interested in making our marriage work. It finally got to a point that in our marriage, he ended up leaving me, but this time it was for good. He left me a note that was saying that he was leaving me. I came home from work, and he was gone. Everything that he had was gone. He was gone. And all I remember is that I cried. By this time, our son was approximately 1.5 years old, and I didn't know what to do. I just started crying. A few days prior to that day happening, I was on the phone with a friend of mine that I used to party with in California, and was just complaining to her like I had always done. Little did I know that in between the time that I had left California and to the time that I called her, she had received Jesus into her life. And so in the midst of me complaining to her, she tells me, "You know what, Anita? You just need to give it all to God. You just need to give it all to God." As soon as she told me this, I'm like, yeah, right. Don't even tell me. I don't even want to hear about God. Don't even talk to me about God. I quickly dismissed whatever she was talking about God and decided just to continue complaining to her. At that moment where where I was reading the note, I remember her words being brought up. And I immediately went to the nearest Catholic church that was by my house. I was so in debt and in fear of panic and anxiety attacks that the thought of me even driving too far from my house scared the living daylights out of me. I seriously was in torment day and night with anxiety and panic attacks. And so I ended up making it to the church. The church was probably a mile away, if that. I don't even know how long, but I know it was the closest church to me was Catholic. And so I went in. It was during a weekday. And I remember walking into the church doors, and it was so quiet and it was dark, but there was just enough light for me to know where I was going and to see where the pews were. And I ended up walking in and found a pew and knelt down, and I just started crying. I started crying, and I was crying uncontrollably. I was sobbing, and I remember just for the longest time just waiting. I just wanted to let it all out in my tears. And I started to talk from the deep recesses of my soul for the very first time to God. And I just told God, I said, "God, please, please just take this, take my life, take everything. Now, with the marriage being the way it was, I had started reading a book. The title was called The Power of a Praying Wife, and it's by Stormy Omartian. And I started reading this book approximately 2 months before that day that I went to the church, and there was words that came up, and this was out of pure desperation. Again, I was not interested in God or anything, but the fact that this woman had prayers specifically based on marriages, I was desperate to save my marriage, even if it meant praying to a God that I really didn't know. I didn't have any relationship with or anything. So the words that I remember reading in this book came up in my mind as I'm talking to God, and the words were that Stormy wrote: just surrender, give it everything to him, give him your fears, give him even the good things that have happened, give him everything, give him your life. And so remembering these words, I just started asking God. I was pleading with God, God, please take everything, take my marriage, take my son, take me, take my life. And I remember even as I'm speaking this to him, I was so scared that he was literally going to take my life. I was going to die. But even in the midst of that fear, I said, you know what, if he does, and he does. I just gave up. I didn't know what else to do. I was in such desperate straits that I just asked God, please take my life. Take every part of me. Please, whatever life you have for me, it's got to be better than the life I have now. Those specific words, I remember speaking to him. And in the midst of that, I spoke more words and continued crying and just was pleading and begging for him to change me and take me in my life. And all of a sudden, I remember as if it was yesterday, I stopped. Like, it was done. Like, something happened to where it was finished. Like, I could stop crying. It was done. It was okay. I was literally being comforted. And I remember at that moment when I had stopped, I wiped my tears and I got up. And I remember walking towards the doors of the church. And as I'm walking towards the doors of the church to leave, I remember feeling such comfort. There was peace, but I remember mostly that it was such comfort that I've never felt before in my life. Like, if I can describe it, it would be, if you could just think of your most comfortable day in your most comfortablest pajamas and your most coziest blanket with a hot cup of cocoa, just tucked in on your most comfy chair, watching a really just comfortable movie, and just resting with some great comfortable slippers, and you have nothing to do, you don't have to do anything, and you're sitting there and you're comfortable. The comfort that I experienced that day didn't even compare by a million times the comfort that I just described, just as an example. I mean, this comfort had literally wrapped itself around me like a blanket and over me and under me. And I remember walking out of that church, and as soon as I walked out of the doors of that church, the first thing that met me outside the doors was this bright sunshine. And I remember I was like, whoa. And I remember squinting because I was like, it was so beautiful. In Cleveland, in winter, it rarely sunshines. So just the fact that this sunshine was so bright in my face and just so welcoming, it was like a new day, you know? Anyway, I walked out, and I remember the first thing I saw was a soup kitchen across the street. And I decided, you know what, I'm going to go get some soup. It was just this warm, cozy feeling that I never, again, experienced before like this. And I ended up walking across the street, and I sat down, ordered some soup, and just as the soup came, I took my first spoon, my second spoon. Right at my second spoon, God, I'll never forget it. Right at my second spoon, my phone rang. And I answered my phone. It was my husband. My husband was telling me he was coming back home.